The exoplanet Oblivion 7 hung in the void like a jagged scar on the fabric of space. Its surface was an endless sprawl of cracked earth and metallic spires jutting from the ground like broken teeth. The sky above churned with perpetual storms, lightning arcing across clouds that glowed faintly green from ionized particles. Automated drones patrolled the skies, their sleek forms slicing through the turbulence with mechanical precision. Below them, prisoners moved like shadows, scavenging what little they could find amidst the ruins of their captivity. Kael Armitage crouched behind a crumbling wall, his breath shallow but steady. His hands were calloused from years of survival, his skin weathered by the planet's harsh winds. He had been here long enough to know every trick for staying alive and every reason to hate the ones who put him here. Sentenced for exposing corporate corruption back on Earth, he'd become just another cog in the machine of injustice. But Kael wasn't one to let bitterness consume him entirely. No, he channeled it into something sharper: defiance. Today, though, something felt different. As he sifted through the debris near the edge of the containment zone, a forbidden area marked by towering energy barriers, he found fragments of ancient technology embedded in the soil. It wasn't Veylith tech, it was human. Fragments of circuitry bore markings he recognized from old Earth designs, centuries out of date. A chill ran down his spine as he pieced together the implications. Humans had been here before the Veylith arrived. And if humans had built this place, then what exactly were they trying to contain? His fingers brushed against a small device, half buried in the dirt. It pulsed faintly, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift when stared at too long. Against his better judgment, curiosity got the better of him. He activated it. The reaction was instantaneous. The ground beneath him shuddered violently, throwing him off balance. Above, the storm clouds parted, revealing patterns of light that formed intricate alien glyphs. Somewhere deep within the planet, a low hum resonated, growing louder until it became a deafening roar. Then came the first signs of life, not the bioengineered predators the Veylith had seeded here, but something far older, far darker. Tendrils of shadow erupted from fissures in the earth, writhing like living smoke. They consumed everything they touched, reducing rock and metal alike to ash. Panic surged through Kael as he scrambled to his feet. Whatever he'd unleashed, it wasn't meant to be free. Not yet. Back at the makeshift camp where the other prisoners gathered, whispers spread quickly about the strange phenomena occurring near the containment zone. Mira Solis stood apart from the crowd, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She had seen enough horrors on Oblivion 7 to last a lifetime, but this was something new. Her sharp eyes scanned the horizon, catching glimpses of those writhing tendrils snaking across the landscape. Something primal stirred within her, a mix of fear and fascination she couldn't quite suppress. Dax Rourke leaned against a rusted-out vehicle, his jaw clenched. He didn't need to see the chaos firsthand to know trouble was coming. Trouble always found them eventually. "We should move," he growled, his voice rough with disuse. "If we stay here, we're dead." Jin Wei sat cross-legged nearby, tinkering with a salvaged drone controller. His movements were precise, almost meditative, but his brow furrowed with concern. "Dead either way," he muttered under his breath, "but moving might buy us time." When Kael stumbled into the camp, covered in dust and breathing hard, all eyes turned to him. For once, no one questioned his motives or doubted his intentions. They could see it written plainly on his face. Whatever had happened out there, it was bad, really bad. "We need to leave, now." Kael's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "This isn't just some malfunction. I think I woke something up, something big." Mira stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "What did you do?" "I don't know," Kael admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But trust me, We don't want to stick around to find out." For a moment, silence reigned. Then Dax pushed off the vehicle, grabbing a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Fine, let's go. But if this goes south, I'm blaming you." As the group prepared to move, the air grew heavier, charged with static electricity. The tendrils were closer now, creeping toward the camp with unnatural speed. Panic rippled through the prisoners, but Kael forced himself to focus. Survival depended on staying calm, even as the world around them unraveled. Little did they know, this was only the beginning. The entity they had awakened, the Devourer, wasn't just a threat to Oblivion 7. It was a threat to everything. The group moved swiftly through the desolate landscape, their footsteps crunching against the brittle ground. The Devourer's tendrils stretched across the horizon like veins of black oil, pulsating with an eerie light that seemed to pulse in time with Kael's racing heart. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the very air resisted their escape. Mira led the way, her medical kit slung over one shoulder and a makeshift spear gripped tightly in her other hand. Her sharp eyes scanned the terrain for any sign of danger, but the chaos unfolding around them made it impossible to anticipate what might come next. Behind her, Dax carried most of their supplies, his broad frame weighed down by scavenged tools and weapons. His face was set in a grim mask, though his knuckles whitened as he tightened his grip on the rifle. He muttered under his breath, curses and prayers blending into an unintelligible murmur. Jin brought up the rear, clutching the drone controller like a lifeline. His fingers danced nervously over its surface, attempting to recalibrate it for reconnaissance. "If I can get this thing airborne," he said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind, "we might be able to spot a safe route." Kael walked at the center of the group, his mind racing faster than his legs. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to put as much distance between himself and the Devourer as possible. But logic told him they needed a plan. They couldn't outrun something that consumed everything in its path. Not without help, and not without understanding what they were dealing with. As if sensing his thoughts, Mira glanced back at him. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her tone clipped but not unkind. "Whatever you woke up, it's spreading fast. Faster than we can move." "I'm not sure about anything," Kael admitted, his voice strained. "But standing still won't save us. We need answers. Maybe those ruins hold something, anything, that can explain what's happening." Mira hesitated, then nodded sharply. "All right. But if this goes sideways, don't expect me to pull your ass out of the fire." The ruins loomed ahead, jagged structures rising from the cracked earth like the bones of some long-dead leviathan. As they approached, the air grew colder, tinged with a metallic tang that stung their throats. Strange symbols glowed faintly along the walls, shifting and twisting as though alive. Kael reached out to touch one, only to recoil as a jolt of energy surged through his fingertips. The pain faded quickly, leaving behind a strange warmth that spread through his chest. For a moment he thought he heard whispers, voices speaking in languages he didn't recognize, but when he turned to ask the others if they'd heard it too, they shook their heads. "This place gives me the creeps," Dax muttered, scanning. "The shadows with wary eyes. Feels like it's watching us." "It probably is," Jin replied, his voice trembling slightly. "These ruins, they're not Veylith. They're older, human, maybe. Look at the design, it's modular, adaptable, like something built to survive." Kael nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping over the crumbling architecture. Survive what? That's the question. They pressed deeper into the ruins, navigating. Narrow corridors lined with more glowing glyphs. At the center of the complex, they found what appeared to be a control room, or what remained of it. Consoles flickered weakly, their screens displaying fragmented data streams. Holographic projections hovered in the air, depicting star charts and schematics of Oblivion 7. One image caught Kael's eye, a massive containment field surrounding the planet's core, labeled with a single word in bold letters, Devourer. "What the hell is that?" Dax demanded, pointing at the projection. Kael stepped closer, his stomach churning as pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. "It's not just a prison," he said quietly. "This whole planet, it's a cage designed to hold something ancient, something powerful enough to destroy entire civilizations." "And you woke it up," Mira said, her voice sharp with accusation. Before Kael could respond, the ground trembled violently, nearly knocking them off their feet. A low, guttural roar echoed through the ruins, reverberating in their chests. The tendrils had breached the perimeter, slithering through the corridors like serpents hunting prey. Shadows danced along the walls, growing darker and more defined with each passing second. "We need to move," Jin shouted, backing away from the entrance. "Now!" They bolted toward the exit, but the Devourer was faster. Tendrils erupted from the floor and ceiling, blocking their path. Panic surged through the group as they scrambled to find another way out. Kael's mind raced, searching for a solution. Then he spotted it, a terminal partially buried beneath rubble. If he could access it, maybe he could activate the containment protocols. "Cover me!" he yelled, diving toward the console. His hands flew over the keys, bypassing corrupted systems and rerouting power to the containment field. The process was agonizingly slow, each second stretching into eternity as the tendrils closed in. Dax fired his rifle wildly, the shots ricocheting harmlessly off the shadowy forms. "Hurry up, Kael! We're running out of time!" "I'm trying!" Kael snapped, sweat dripping from his brow. Finally, the system responded, and the containment field flared to life, forcing the tendrils to retreat. The group collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath as the immediate threat subsided, but the victory was short-lived. As they regrouped outside the ruins, a new danger emerged. The sky above them darkened further, and the hum of engines filled the air. A sleek Veylith cruiser descended from orbit, its hull gleaming ominously in the dim light. Enforcers deployed in droves, their weapons trained on the survivors. "You've caused significant disruption," one of the enforcers announced, its voice cold and mechanical. "Surrender now, or be neutralized." Kael exchanged a glance with the others, his jaw tightening. Surrender wasn't an option, not after everything they'd been through, but fighting back would mean certain death. Trapped between the Devourer and the Veylith, their options were dwindling fast. And yet, even in the face of overwhelming odds, a spark of defiance burned within them. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about proving that humanity still had a fighting chance, even in the darkest corners of the universe. The standoff with the Veylith enforcers was a powder keg waiting to ignite. Kael stood at the center of the group, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. But his mind raced furiously. The Veylith weren't known for negotiation. Their cold efficiency left no room for mercy. Yet something about their rigid posture and calculated movements gave him pause. They weren't here just to eliminate threats. They were gathering information, and that meant they didn't fully understand what they were dealing with either. "Listen," Kael said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "You don't want to do this. Whatever you think you're containing, it's bigger than all of us. If we work together—" "Silence," one of the enforcers interrupted, its metallic voice slicing through the air like a blade. "Your species has demonstrated a consistent inability to comprehend consequences. You will comply, or you will perish." Behind him, Dax shifted uneasily, his grip tightening on the rifle. Mira exchanged a glance with Jin, her expression unreadable but tense. None of them needed to speak to know what the others were thinking. Compliance wasn't an option, not when the alternative meant handing over control to beings who viewed humanity as little more than pests. Before anyone could act, the ground trembled again. The Devourer had not retreated, it had merely regrouped. Tendrils erupted from the earth once more, snaking toward the Veylith forces with unnatural speed. Chaos erupted as the enforcers opened fire, their energy weapons cutting through the shadows only to have them reform moments later. The tendrils lashed out, enveloping several enforcers in their grasp. Their screams were brief, cut off as the tendrils dissolved them into nothingness. "Now!" Kael shouted, seizing the moment. The group bolted past the distracted Veylith, weaving through the chaos as tendrils and blasts of energy crisscrossed around them. Each step felt like running through a war zone, every breath stolen by the suffocating weight of fear and desperation. They reached the edge of the ruins, where the landscape opened up into a wide expanse of cracked plains. Here, the Devourer's presence was even stronger. The air shimmered with heat-like distortions, and the ground seemed to pulse faintly beneath their feet. Mira stumbled, catching herself before she fell. She looked up, her face pale but resolute. "We can't keep running forever. Sooner or later, it'll catch up. And sooner or later, the Veylith will too," Dax added grimly. "We need a plan, a real one." Kael nodded, scanning the horizon. In the distance, he spotted a cluster of structures, partially buried in the sand, a remnant of whatever civilization had once thrived here. It was a long shot, but it might hold answers, or at least shelter. "Over there," he said, pointing. "If we can make it to those buildings, maybe we'll find something useful." The journey was grueling. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the planet itself conspired against them. The Devourer's tendrils continued to pursue, though they moved slower now, almost methodically. It was as if the entity was testing them, probing their limits. Kael couldn't shake the feeling that it was learning. From them, from the Veylith, from everything it encountered. When they finally reached the structures, exhaustion weighed heavily on their shoulders. The buildings were ancient, their walls etched with the same shifting symbols they'd seen in the ruins earlier. Inside, they found remnants of advanced technology. Panels displaying fragmented data streams, holographic projections, depicting star systems and storage units filled with artifacts that defied explanation. Jin immediately set to work, deciphering the consoles, his fingers flying over the controls. This is incredible," he murmured, awe creeping into his voice. "These systems are centuries ahead of anything we've got, but they're damaged, corrupted." "What does it say?" Mira asked, leaning over his shoulder. "It's hard to tell. There's mention of a great containment, some kind of fail-safe mechanism, but it's incomplete, like whoever built this place knew they wouldn't survive to finish it." Kael frowned, piecing together the fragments of information. "So the humans who came here before, they tried to stop the Devourer, but failed. And now it's our turn," Dax said bitterly. "Great, just great." As Jin worked, Mira wandered, deeper into the structure, drawn by a faint hum emanating from a sealed chamber. Using tools scavenged from their supplies, she managed to pry open the door. Inside, she found a massive crystalline core suspended in midair, glowing faintly with an inner light. Symbols spiraled across its surface, pulsing in time with the She reached out instinctively, her hand hovering inches away. "Don't touch it!" Kael called out, rushing to her side. "We don't know what it does." "I think I do," Mira replied softly. "It's alive. Or part of something." "Alive! This must be how they contained the Devourer before." Her words sent a chill through the group. If the core was indeed part of the containment system, then reactivating it might buy them time, or unleash something far worse. The decision weighed heavily on all of them, but ultimately it fell to Kael. He stared at the core, his mind racing with possibilities and consequences. "We don't have a choice," he said finally. "If we don't try, we're dead anyway." With Jin's help, they began the painstaking process of repairing the core's systems. It was slow, frustrating work, requiring them to jury-rig components scavenged from the ruins and their own equipment. As they worked, tensions flared. Dax grew increasingly agitated, pacing back and forth while muttering under his breath. "This is insane," he snapped at one point. "We're playing with forces we don't understand. What happens if we screw this up? Huh? Do any of you even care?" "Yes, we care," Mira shot back, her voice sharp with frustration. "But sitting around doing nothing isn't going to save us. If you've got a better idea, let's hear it." Dax clenched his fists, his jaw tight. For a moment it looked like he might lash out, but instead he turned away, shaking his head. "Fine, go ahead, get yourselves killed." Despite the tension, progress was made. Slowly, the core began to stabilize, its glow growing brighter and steadier. But just as they thought they were close to success, betrayal struck. One of the prisoners, a wiry man named Rin, who had joined their group reluctantly, slipped away, unnoticed. Moments later, alarms blared throughout the structure, and the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridors. "He sold us out," Jin hissed, his face pale with anger and fear. "He must have signaled the Veylith." "Damn it," Kael cursed, slamming his fist against the console. "We don't have time for this." The Veylith enforcers stormed the building, their weapons trained on the group. "Cease your activities," one of them commanded. "Further interference will result in termination." Kael hesitated, torn between surrender and defiance. Then he noticed something. The core's glow had intensified, responding to the proximity of the Veylith. An idea formed in his mind, desperate but plausible. "Keep working," he whispered to Jin. "I'll distract them." Without waiting for a response, Kael stepped forward, raising his hands. "All right, you've got us, but you should know you're making a mistake. That thing out there, it's not just some anomaly. It's intelligent, and it's learning, fast." The lead enforcer tilted its head, its featureless mask betraying no emotion. "Irrelevant. Your actions have destabilized this facility. Compliance is non-negotiable." While Kael kept the enforcers occupied, Jin and Mira worked frantically to complete the repairs. Dax, meanwhile, positioned himself near the entrance, ready to provide cover if things went south. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, Jin gave a triumphant shout. "It's done! Powering up now!" The core surged to life, emitting a blinding burst of light that flooded the chamber. The Veylith enforcers staggered back, their systems momentarily overwhelmed. Seizing the opportunity, the group bolted for the exit, leaving the stunned enforcers behind. Outside, the Devourer reacted violently to the activation of the core. Its tendrils writhed and twisted, recoiling as if burned. For the first time since its awakening, it seemed uncertain, hesitant. But Kael knew better than to celebrate. This wasn't victory, it was a reprieve. And as they regrouped, amidst the ruins, battered but alive, the weight of their choices settled over them. They had gambled everything on a desperate plan, and while it had worked, for now, the cost was still unknown. Trust had been shattered, alliances tested, and the true nature of the Devourer remained shrouded in mystery. Yet even in the face of such uncertainty, a spark of hope flickered within them. Humanity had survived worse, and as long as they stood together, they would fight to ensure that survival meant something. The core's activation had bought them time, but it was a fragile victory. The Devourer recoiled from the containment field, its tendrils retreating into the earth like wounded serpents. Yet even as the immediate threat subsided, an oppressive silence settled over the landscape. The storm clouds above churned more violently than ever, and the air crackled with static electricity, as though the planet itself braced for what came. Next, Kael stood at the edge of the ruins, staring out at the horizon where the Devourer's shadow lingered. His mind raced, replaying every decision that had led them here. He knew they couldn't rely on the core indefinitely. It was a patchwork solution, held together by scraps of ancient technology and sheer desperation. Sooner or later, it would fail, and when it did, the consequences would be catastrophic. "We need to figure out how to finish this," Mira said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of urgency beneath her calm exterior. That core isn't permanent. It's buying us time, not solving the problem. And what exactly do you suggest we do? Dax snapped, his frustration boiling over. March up to that thing and ask nicely if it'll go back to sleep? We're outmatched, outnumbered, and running on fumes. Mira shot him a sharp look, her patience wearing thin. If you've got a better idea, I'm all ears. Otherwise, shut up and let us think. Jin, who had been quietly examining data streams from the core's interface, spoke up hesitantly. There might be another way. All eyes turned to him, and he swallowed hard before continuing. The core, it's not just a containment device, it's also a communication hub. Whatever humans built this place, they didn't just lock the Devourer away. They tried to talk to it. Talk to it? Kael echoed, incredulous. You mean negotiate? I mean understand, Jin corrected. These symbols, these patterns, they're not random. They're language, a very complex one, but still a language. If we can decode it, maybe we can find a way to reason with it. Dax scoffed. Reason with a force that eats planets for breakfast. Yeah, good luck with that. It's our only shot, Kael said firmly, cutting off further argument. If we don't try, we're dead anyway, and if we succeed... He trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air. Success meant more than survival. It meant proving that humanity could adapt, innovate, and persevere, even against impossible odds. They returned to the chamber housing the core, their movements deliberate but hurried. Jin took the lead, interfacing with the crystalline structure, while Mira monitored the energy readings. Kael paced nearby, his thoughts consumed by the enormity of what they were attempting, communicating with an entity as ancient and alien as the Devourer felt like trying to bridge galaxies with a single thread. But failure wasn't an option, not now. As Jin worked, fragments of the Devourer's language began to emerge, patterns of light and sound that pulsed through the chamber. At first, they seemed chaotic, incomprehensible. But as Jin refined the translation algorithms, something remarkable happened. The patterns coalesced into coherent sequences. Symbols formed words, and words formed ideas. Slowly, painfully, they began to piece together a rudimentary understanding of the Devourer's nature. It's not just destruction, Jin murmured, his voice tinged with awe. It's consumption, evolution. It doesn't destroy because it wants to, it consumes because it has to. It's driven by instinct, not malice. So it's less like a monster and more like a predator? Mira asked, her brow furrowed. More like both, Kael interjected. And predators can be reasoned with, if you speak their language. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. As Jin inputted the final sequence of translated data, the core emitted a low hum that resonated deep within their chests. The glowing symbols on its surface shifted, forming a new pattern, a message. For a moment no one moved, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Then the ground trembled violently, and the chamber filled with a deafening roar. The Devourer had responded. "What the hell did you do?" Dax shouted, raising his weapon instinctively. "I opened a channel," Jin replied, his voice shaking. "But I don't know if it understands us or if it even cares." Before anyone could react, the core flared brightly, engulfing the chamber in blinding light. When the glow subsided, Kael found himself standing in a surreal expanse of shifting darkness. The world around him was neither solid nor liquid, existing somewhere between reality and nightmare. Shadows writhed and twisted, forming shapes that defied comprehension. In the distance, a massive form loomed, a shapeless mass of writhing tendrils and glowing eyes, radiating both terror and majesty. "You are the one who awakened me," a voice boomed, reverberating in Kael's mind rather than his ears. It was neither male nor female, neither human nor machine, but something entirely otherworldly. "Why have you come?" Kael steadied himself, forcing down the primal fear clawing at his chest. "We didn't mean to wake you," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "But now that we have, we need to understand. What do you want?" "I want nothing," the Devourer replied. "I am hunger, I am growth. I consume to survive, as all things must." "But you don't have to consume everything," Kael argued. "There has to be another way. A balance." The Devourer paused, its presence seeming to shift and waver. "Balance is fleeting. Order decays. Life ends. Only consumption endures." Kael clenched his fists, searching for the right words. You must see that destruction isn't the answer. You've been contained here for millennia. Is that what you truly desire? To exist only to destroy?" For a long moment, the Devourer was silent. Then it spoke again, its tone softer but no less ominous. "You seek to contain me once more, to imprison me." "No," Kael countered. "We seek to coexist, to find a way forward, for both of us." The Devourer's form shifted, its tendrils, reaching out toward Kael. He braced himself, expecting pain or death, but instead he felt a strange warmth, as though the entity was probing his mind. Memories flashed before him, moments of triumph, failure, love, loss. The Devourer saw him not just as prey, but as a being capable of choice, sacrifice, and hope. "You are different from the others," the Devourer said finally. "Perhaps there is merit in your proposal." Kael exhaled sharply, relief washing over him, but the Devourer wasn't finished. "However, such a pact requires a price. One of you must serve as the conduit, a bridge between my will and yours." The realization hit Kael like a hammer. This was the cost of negotiation. Someone would have to merge with the Devourer, becoming part of its consciousness to maintain the fragile peace. It was a fate worse than death, or so it seemed. "I'll do it," Kael said without hesitation. "Take me!" "No!" Mira shouted, her voice echoing faintly as though she were miles away. "You can't! There has to be another way!" "There isn't," Kael replied, his resolve unshakable. "This is my mess, my responsibility. Let me fix it." The Devourer regarded him silently, then nodded. "So be it." In an instant, Kael felt himself pulled apart and reassembled, his consciousness merging with the Devourer's vast intelligence. Pain and clarity mingled as he became aware of the entity's infinite hunger, its endless drive to consume. Yet amidst the chaos, he retained a sliver of his humanity, a spark of defiance that refused to yield. When he returned to the physical world, the others stared at him in shock. His body remained intact, but his eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the Devourer's presence within him. The core pulsed steadily, its containment field stronger than ever. "It's done," Kael said, his voice distant yet resolute. "For now, it's contained, but I'm changed." Mira stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Kael, I'll be fine," he assured her, though he wasn't sure if it was true. "Just promise me one thing. Keep fighting. No matter what happens, don't let this place break you." As the group processed what had transpired, the Veylith cruiser descended once more, its enforcers deploying with renewed determination. But this time, the prisoners stood ready, not as victims, but as survivors. Together they faced the unknown, united by a shared purpose and an unyielding belief in humanity's resilience. Even as Kael's fate hung precariously in the balance, one truth remained clear. Humanity's spirit could never truly be extinguished, not even by the Devourer. The immediate aftermath of Kael's sacrifice was a mixture of relief and unease. The Devourer had retreated, its tendrils withdrawing into the earth as though sated, or perhaps merely biding its time. The containment field pulsed steadily, powered by the crystalline core and stabilized by Kael's consciousness now fused within it. But the cost weighed heavily on the survivors. Mira knelt beside the core, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch its glowing surface. She could feel the faintest echo of Kael's presence, a fractured whisper of his thoughts, but it was distant, muffled, as if he were trapped behind an impenetrable veil. "He's still in there," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the machinery. "He didn't just disappear." Jin stood nearby, his face pale but resolute. "It's not gone," he said quietly. "The Devourer, it's contained, but it's still alive. And so is Kael, at least part of him." Dax paced restlessly, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He wanted to lash out, to break something, anything, to release the storm of emotions brewing inside him. Instead, he clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. "This isn't over," he growled. "You think that thing's just gonna sit there forever, waiting for us to screw up again? No one said it would be easy." Mira shot back, her tone sharp, but tinged with exhaustion. "But we have a chance now, a chance to rebuild, to survive." Rebuilding wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. With the Veylith enforcers temporarily withdrawn, likely regrouping after their failed attempts to reclaim control, the prisoners turned survivors set about securing their position. They scavenged what remained of the ruins, repurposing ancient technology and salvaged materials to fortify their makeshift camp. Jin worked tirelessly to repair communication arrays, hoping to send a signal off-world before the planet's systems collapsed entirely. Mira focused on tending to the wounded and organizing resources, her medical expertise proving invaluable as injuries mounted from skirmishes with both the Devourer's lingering remnants and rogue wildlife. Yet, amidst the chaos, moments of quiet, reflection emerged. Dax found himself drawn to the edge of the containment zone, staring out at the desolate landscape beyond. His guilt gnawed at him. Memories of past atrocities committed during his days as a soldier haunted him, amplified by Kael's selfless act. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to confront those memories, to acknowledge the pain and regret buried deep within. Perhaps survival wasn't just about staying alive. Perhaps it was also about finding redemption. Mira noticed the change in him. One evening, as they sat around a small fire built from scrap metal and biofuel, she spoke softly. "You've been carrying that weight for a long time," she said, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames. "Kael gave us a second chance. Maybe it's time you gave yourself one too." Dax didn't respond immediately, but the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "Maybe," he muttered, his voice rough but softer than usual. "But I don't know how." "You start by helping others," Mira replied simply. "That's what Kael did. That's what keeps us going." As days turned into weeks, the group began to transform. They weren't just survivors anymore, they were builders, creators, forging a fragile community in the shadow of unimaginable danger. Jin managed to restore partial functionality to several drones, using them to scout the surrounding area for resources and threats. Mira established a rudimentary medical bay, treating injuries and illnesses with whatever supplies they could scavenge. Even Dax found purpose, taking charge of defense efforts and training others to handle weapons and navigate the treacherous terrain. But the specter of the Devourer loomed large over everything they did. Its presence was a constant reminder of the fragility of their existence and of the price Kael had paid to secure their survival. Each night Mira returned to the core, speaking softly to the faint echo of Kael's consciousness. She told him about their progress, their struggles, their hopes. Whether or not he could hear her, she couldn't say. But it gave her comfort, a way to keep him close even as he drifted further away. One day, while inspecting the core's readings, Jin made a startling discovery. The energy patterns emanating from the structure were shifting subtly, forming new sequences that hadn't been present before. At first, he thought it was a malfunction, a sign that the containment field was destabilizing. But as he analyzed the data more closely, he realized something far stranger. The Devourer was communicating again. "It's learning," Jin announced, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and dread. "Not just consuming, learning." Mira joined him, her eyes widening as she studied the readings. "What does it mean?" "I don't know," Jin admitted, "but it's adapting, evolving. Maybe Kael's influence is stronger than we thought." The implications were staggering. If the Devourer was capable of change, if Kael's humanity had somehow tempered its insatiable hunger, then perhaps coexistence wasn't such an impossible dream after all. But it also raised unsettling questions. How much of Kael remained? Was he still fighting to maintain control, or had he been consumed entirely? Despite the uncertainty, the group pressed on. They fortified their defenses, expanded their operations, and continued searching for a way to contact the outside world. Slowly but surely, they carved out a semblance of order in the midst of chaos, and through it all, they carried Kael's legacy, not as a martyr but as a symbol of hope, because even in the darkest corners of the universe, humanity refused to give up, not completely, not ever. Months passed, and the survivors of Oblivion 7 had transformed their makeshift camp into a fledgling settlement. The ruins that once symbolized despair now stood as monuments to resilience, repurposed into shelters, workshops, and even a rudimentary power grid. The containment field pulsed steadily in the distance, a silent sentinel guarding against the Devourer's return. Yet for all their progress, an undercurrent of unease lingered. A shared understanding that peace was fragile, held together by threads of ingenuity, sacrifice, and sheer willpower. Mira spent her days tending to the wounded and overseeing the medical bay, but her nights were reserved for the core. She sat beside it often, speaking softly to the faint echo of Kael's consciousness, or what she hoped was still him. Sometimes she thought she felt a response, a subtle shift in the energy patterns, a flicker of light that seemed almost deliberate. Other times, there was nothing but silence. Still she persisted, driven by a stubborn hope that Kael's humanity hadn't been extinguished entirely. Jin worked tirelessly to repair communication arrays, determined to send a signal off-world before the planet's systems collapsed completely. His efforts finally bore fruit one evening, when a faint transmission broke through the static. It wasn't much, just a garbled message from an unknown source, but it was enough to reignite their determination. "We're not alone," Jin whispered, his voice trembling with relief and excitement. "Someone out there is listening." Dax took charge of defense operations, training others to handle weapons and navigate the treacherous terrain. But he also found solace in unexpected places, in teaching children how to track wildlife, in sharing stories around the fire at night. Redemption wasn't something he sought actively, but it found him nonetheless, woven into the fabric of the community they were building. Yet despite their achievements, questions remained unanswered. The core's readings continued to evolve, its energy patterns forming sequences that defied explanation. One night, Mira noticed something new. Symbols appearing along the surface of the crystalline structure, glowing faintly in the dim light. They were similar to those seen during the Devourer's initial emergence, but different somehow, more intricate, more deliberate. "What does it mean?" Jin asked, joining her in the chamber. His voice was hushed, tinged with both awe and apprehension. "I don't know," Mira admitted, her brow furrowed as she studied the symbols. "But it feels alive, like it's trying to tell us something." Before they could delve deeper, the ground trembled faintly, and the hum of engines filled the air. A distant ship descended from orbit, its sleek form cutting through the storm clouds like a blade. Its hull bore no markings, no insignia, nothing to indicate whether it hailed from Earth, the Veylith, or some other civilization entirely. As it landed on the outskirts of the settlement, a single figure emerged, clad in a shimmering suit that reflected the chaotic sky. "We've come to reclaim what was lost," the figure announced, their voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "The cycle must be completed." The survivors exchanged uneasy glances, their hands instinctively reaching for weapons. Who or what had arrived? Allies, conquerors, or something far more enigmatic? As the figure approached, Mira stepped forward, her expression resolute. "Whatever you're here for, you'll have to go through us first." The visitor paused, tilting their head slightly as though considering her words. Then they smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent shivers down everyone's spines. "Very well," they said. "Let the reckoning begin." Behind them, the core flared brightly, its glow intensifying as though responding to the newcomer's presence. For a moment, the symbols etched across its surface shifted, forming a single word that pulsed with ominous clarity: return. And in that instant, the survivors realized their fight was far from over. The Devourer wasn't the only force watching them, and Kael's sacrifice might have only delayed the inevitable.